The office was quiet as Mike settled into his seat across from me, his expression heavy with unspoken thoughts. I could see the tension in his posture, the weight of something unresolved pressing down on him. "I don't know where to start," he began after a long pause. "It's complicated. I'm not even sure if I have the right to feel this way." "Take your time," I encouraged. "Sometimes just putting it into words can help untangle the knot." He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "It's about Cathy, my cousin. Well, I guess you could say she's always had a bit of bad luck. Last year, she lost her job. She was struggling to make rent, didn't know how she'd keep things afloat. And I thought I could help. I mean, she's family, right? Isn't that what you're supposed to do? What did you do to help her?" "I gave her money," he said, his voice tightening. "A good chunk of my savings, actually. Enough to cover her rent for a couple of months and give her some breathing room." I didn't even hesitate. At the time, it felt like the right thing to do. She was so grateful, or at least, she seemed grateful. She hugged me, told me I was her rock, her savior. I thought I'd made a difference. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. But then, nothing. She stopped calling, stopped texting. I'd reach out to check on her, and half the time she wouldn't even respond. Months went by, and it was like I didn't exist to her anymore. And then, the other day. His voice faltered. "What happened?" "I was walking past her house, and I saw her through the window. She was having some kind of party, celebrating a promotion, I think. There were balloons, laughter, music. Her life was back on track, and she looked happy. But she didn't even think to tell me about it. No call, no thank you, not even a casual update. Just, nothing." He sat forward, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. It hit me so hard in that moment. Not just with Cathy, but with everyone I've ever helped. It's like, people take what they need and then forget you were ever there. And I know it's selfish, but I can't stop asking myself, does my help even matter if no one acknowledges it? I let the silence settle for a moment, giving him space to gather his thoughts. "That sounds incredibly painful," I said finally. "It sounds like you're feeling not just unappreciated, but invisible." "Exactly." His voice cracked, and he looked down at his hands. "It's not about the money. It's not even about Cathy, not really. It's this pattern. I give, and people just move on. And I'm left wondering if I even made a difference at all." "Have you ever shared these feelings with Cathy or anyone else you've helped?" He shook his head. "No. I mean, how could I? It feels so petty, like I'm keeping score. I didn't help her because I wanted something in return. At least, I didn't think I did. But now I don't know. Maybe deep down, I was hoping for, I don't know, some kind of acknowledgement. Some sign that what I did mattered. That's not petty, Mike. It's human. We all want to feel seen and valued, especially when we put so much of ourselves into helping someone. The question is, what does acknowledgement mean to you? Is it about words, actions, or something else entirely?" He frowned, thinking. "I guess I don't know anymore. I thought it was enough just to help, but maybe it's not. Or maybe I've been looking for gratitude in the wrong places." I leaned forward slightly, meeting his gaze. "Let's explore that together. What if we could redefine what gratitude looks like, not just for Cathy, but for yourself? What if the act of giving itself could be the reward, regardless of how it's received?" His expression softened, though the doubt lingered in his eyes. "That sounds nice in theory, but how do you actually do that? How do you let go of needing something in return?" "That's a big question," I said with a small smile. "But it's one worth answering. Let's take it one step at a time. If Mike's story resonates with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt unappreciated after helping someone? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments, I'd love to know. Mike walked into my office the following week looking a little less tense but still preoccupied. He sat down without waiting for an invitation, rubbing his palms together as if bracing himself for what he was about to say. I've been thinking about what you said, he began. About acknowledgement, about how maybe I've been looking for this. He glanced at me, his eyes searching for confirmation that he was on the right track. I realized something, he continued. I don't think it's just Cathy that hurt me. It's like, her silence opened up this wound I didn't even know I had. I've been doing this my whole life, helping people, being there for them, but not saying anything when they forget about me. And now, it's like all of those moments are crashing down on me at once. He leaned back in the chair, exhaling sharply. I'm starting to wonder if I've been setting myself up for disappointment. Like maybe I've been expecting people to read my mind, to just know how much their acknowledgement means to me. But they don't. And I don't tell them. I waited for a moment, letting his words settle. What do you think stops you from telling them? Fear, I guess. I mean, what if they think I'm selfish? What if they feel like I'm keeping tabs on them, like I'm only helping them to get something in return? That's not who I want to be. Does asking for acknowledgement make you selfish, or does it make you human? His shoulders sagged slightly, as if the weight of the question itself was a relief. I don't know. Maybe both. I've always thought of myself as the guy people can count on. The guy who doesn't ask for anything back. It's like part of my identity. But now I'm wondering if I've built that identity on this lie I keep telling myself. That I don't need anything from anyone. There was a crack in his voice, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. But I do need something. I need to feel like I matter to the people I help. I need to know that what I do has meaning. That's a powerful realization, Mike. And it's not a weakness to need those things. It's a strength to recognize them. But here's the thing, if you're not communicating your needs, how can anyone meet them? He nodded slowly, absorbing the thought. I've been so focused on being the strong one, the giver, that I've ignored my own needs. And then I get resentful when people don't meet them. It's not fair to them, is it? It's not about fairness, Mike. It's about clarity. Relationships, even with family, are a two-way street. When we give, it's natural to hope for acknowledgement. But we can't expect people to meet needs we don't express. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. Do you think it's too late to tell Cathy how I feel? It's never too late to have an honest conversation, as long as you approach it with openness and kindness. The goal isn't to make her feel guilty, it's to share your truth and give her a chance to understand where you're coming from. He nodded again, this time with more certainty. I think I'll try. I don't know how she'll take it, but I need to say something. Not just for her, but for me. I don't want to keep carrying this around. As he stood to leave, there was a glimmer of something new in his eyes, maybe hope, maybe determination. I couldn't tell for sure, but it was a step in the right direction. If you've ever struggled with unspoken expectations in your relationships, I'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you handle the balance between giving and needing acknowledgement? Share your experiences in the comments, I'd love to learn from you. Mike returned a week later, his demeanor a mix of nervous energy and quiet resolve. He sat down and immediately started speaking, as though he had been rehearsing this conversation for days. I talked to her, he began, his voice steady but tinged with apprehension. Cathy. I didn't think I'd actually do it, but I couldn't stop thinking about what we talked about last time. About being clear, about sharing my truth. So, I called her and asked if we could meet. He paused, running a hand through his hair. She sounded surprised. I think she thought I was just going to check in, like I always do, but this time I told her it was important. How did she respond when you met? She was polite, at first. You know, smiling, making small talk, acting like everything was fine. And for a moment, I almost chickened out. I didn't want to ruin the mood, but then I thought about how long I've been carrying this around, how much it's been eating at me. I couldn't keep pretending. He sat forward, his hands clasped tightly. I told her everything. How I'd felt when she didn't respond to my messages. How much it hurt to see her celebrating her success with everyone but me. How I wasn't looking for constant praise, but I needed to feel like I mattered to her, like the help I gave wasn't invisible. His voice cracked slightly as he continued. At first, she looked stunned. Like she didn't know where all of this was coming from. And then, she started crying. She said she didn't realize I felt that way. She told me she had been so wrapped up in her own problems that she hadn't thought about how her silence might have affected me. How did that feel, hearing her say that? Honestly, it was like this weight lifted off my chest. Not completely, but enough that I could breathe again. She apologized, really apologized. Not just the kind of apology you say to end a conversation, but the kind where you can tell someone means it. He sat back, his shoulders finally relaxing. She told me she's been struggling with guilt. That every time she thought about reaching out, she convinced herself it was too late, that I'd moved on or didn't care anymore. She said she was ashamed, and she didn't know how to face me. There was a long pause, and I could tell he was turning something over in his mind. I didn't expect that. I went into that conversation thinking I'd have to fight to get her to understand. But instead, it felt like we were both peeling back layers of this wall we'd built between us. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like she really saw me. That sounds like a powerful moment, Mike. How did you leave things with her? We talked for a while, about everything. Not just about the money, but about our relationship, about how we've both let things drift. She promised to stay in touch more, and I told her I'd work on being more honest about what I need. It felt good. Like a step forward. He looked up, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I know it's not perfect. I know it's going to take time to rebuild that trust, to really feel like we're on the same page. But for the first time, I feel like we're both trying. And that means something. He leaned back, exhaling deeply. I don't know if I'll ever stop feeling a little hurt about the past. But I think I can live with it now, knowing that we're both working on being better. If you've ever had to have a tough conversation with someone you care about, you know how hard it can be to take that first step. But sometimes, the hardest conversations are the ones that lead to the greatest growth. What about you? Have you ever had a moment like this? I'd love to hear your story. When Mike came in this time, there was a different energy about him. His shoulders were relaxed, and though his usual seriousness remained, there was something lighter in the way he moved. He sat down, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I've been thinking a lot about gratitude, he began, his tone thoughtful. Not just Cathy's, but mine too. It's weird, after that conversation with her, I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Like, the other day, I was walking through the park, and I saw this kid drop his toy. Before I could even think about it, I picked it up and handed it to him. He smiled at me and said, "Thanks, mister," and that was it. No big deal. But for some reason, it stuck with me. He sat back, crossing his arms loosely. I realized that in that moment, I didn't expect anything from him. I wasn't looking for acknowledgement or gratitude. I helped him because it was the right thing to do. And that made me wonder, why is it so easy to feel good about helping a stranger, but so complicated when it's someone close to you? That's an interesting observation, Mike. Why do you think that is? I think it's because with strangers, there's no history, no expectations. You don't expect a kid in the park to remember you forever or to repay you somehow. But with family, with people you care about, there's this unspoken, I don't know, contract. Like, if I'm there for you, you'll be there for me. And when they're not, it feels personal. It feels like a rejection. He paused, his expression growing introspective. But then I started thinking about Cathy again. I kept replaying that conversation in my head, the part where she said she'd been afraid to reach out because of her guilt. And I realized, I've done the same thing. I've let my own fear of rejection stop me from reaching out to people I care about. His voice softened, almost as if he was confessing something to himself. There are people in my life I've drifted away from because I assumed they didn't care anymore. But maybe they were just afraid to reach out, the same way Cathy was. And maybe, all this time, I've been too caught up in my own hurt to see that. He looked at me, his eyes steady. I think I've been too focused on what I wasn't getting to notice what I already have. Like with Cathy, she might not have said thank you right away, but she's trying now. She's making an effort. And I've been so hung up on the past that I almost missed that. That sounds like a meaningful realization. How do you want to move forward with this new perspective? I think I want to let go of the scorekeeping. It's not easy, and I know I'm not going to get it right all the time. But I want to try. I want to focus on the moments that feel good, like helping that kid in the park. And when it comes to the people I care about, I want to be more honest. Not just about what I need, but about what I appreciate. His smile widened slightly, and for the first time since I'd met him, it reached his eyes. I guess I'm starting to realize that gratitude isn't just something you get. It's something you give too. And maybe, the more I focus on giving it, the less I'll need to look for it in return. He stood up, his movements unhurried but purposeful. I've still got work to do. But for the first time, I feel like I'm heading in the right direction. If this story resonates with you, think about the relationships in your own life. Are there places where fear or unspoken expectations have created distance? How can you show gratitude in a way that brings you closer to the people you care about? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. It's always great to learn from each other. When Mike came in for what would be our final session on this particular journey, there was a calmness about him that I hadn't seen before. He settled into the chair and let out a deep, contented sigh, almost as if he was relieved to be here, but no longer weighed down by the burden he'd carried for so long. I've been thinking about how far I've come, he began, his voice steady. And how much my perspective has shifted since we started talking. It's like I've been holding on to this invisible ledger my whole life, tallying up every time I gave something and waiting for the scales to balance. But now, I'm starting to see that some of the most meaningful things we do for others don't come with a receipt. He paused, running his hand over the arm of the chair. I went to see Cathy again. This time, it wasn't about hashing out old wounds. I just wanted to check in, to see how she was doing. She was surprised, I think. I don't know if she expected me to keep my word about staying in touch, but she seemed happy. Like she appreciated it. He smiled faintly, as though replaying a pleasant memory in his mind. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. It felt good to just sit with her, to let her share what's been going on in her life without expecting anything in return. And I realized something while I was sitting there. I don't need her gratitude to know that what I did mattered. I can see it in the way she's picked herself up, the way she's trying to be better. That's enough for me. He looked at me, his expression open and earnest. And it's not just about Cathy. I've started noticing these little moments everywhere. Like last week, my neighbor needed help carrying groceries up the stairs. I didn't even think twice about it, I just did it. And when she smiled and thanked me, it felt nice, but it wasn't why I helped her. I did it because it felt good to do something kind, no strings attached. How does that feel, living without the ledger? Freeing, he said without hesitation. It's like I've stopped waiting for something that might never come, and instead, I'm just living. Giving because I want to, not because I expect anything back. And you know what? I think people can feel that. I think it makes the connection more genuine. He leaned forward slightly, his tone more reflective. That's not to say I don't still have boundaries. I've learned it's okay to say no sometimes, to protect my own energy. But when I do give, I try to give from a place of abundance, not from a place of needing something in return. It's not always easy, it's a work in progress, but it's a better way to live. I nodded, letting the silence linger for a moment before speaking. It sounds like you found a balance that works for you. Gratitude isn't just about what we receive, it's about the way we see the world and the way we choose to contribute to it. He smiled again, this time wider, more confident. Yeah. And I think, for the first time, I'm starting to see the world, and myself, through a different lens. Cathy might not have said thank you when I wanted her to, but that doesn't mean my actions didn't matter. They did. And that's enough. As he stood to leave, there was a lightness in his step that mirrored the shift I'd seen in him over the past weeks. He extended his hand, and I shook it, feeling the strength of someone who had truly grown. Thanks for helping me figure this out, he said before heading for the door. I think I've got it from here. If you've been following Mike's journey, what part of his story resonated with you the most? Have you ever struggled with giving and expecting something in return? Or maybe you found your own way to redefine gratitude? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear your perspective.